Welcome to the top global ranked and award-nominated grad school femtoring podcast, the place for first-gen BIPOCs to listen in on conversations about grad school and growth. In this podcast, you'll learn about all things higher education, personal development, and sustainable productivity. This is Doctora Yvette Martinez-Vu, and I will be serving as your femtor, providing you with tips and tricks and everything else you need to know to successfully navigate grad school and beyond. For over 14 years, I've been empowering first-gen students of color along their personal and professional journeys, and I'm really excited to support you too. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Grad School Femtoring Podcast. This is your host, Doctora Yvette. And today we're going to cover a topic that's near and dear to me, the topic of chronic illness and entrepreneurship. I was just telling our guests that those are the two very, very common and important factors of my life. And so I'm really excited to have our guest today, who is Nikita Williams. She is an award-winning business and mindset coach, certified professional aromatherapist, speaker, and host of the top-ranking global podcast, Crafted to Thrive. She was diagnosed with endometriosis in 2009 and fibromyalgia in 2010. These diagnoses inspired her to use her previous entrepreneur, community, and corporate experience to jumpstart her career as a business coach. She aims to help all entrepreneur women, especially those with chronic illnesses, share their stories and empower them to use their stories as fuel so that they can be successful, create the life they deserve, and most importantly, thrive. Welcome to the podcast, Nikita.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here. Thank you.
Yes. I'm happy to have you here today with us. And I would love for you to get us started by telling us a little bit more about you, about your background, your backstory, and everything that you're comfortable sharing about how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, I was looking at the questions again earlier today, and you asked a specific question about, how did I get here? What's been my, career and education background? And it actually helped me have a link. This is also why I love podcasts, because the questions be giving you some insights and, things like that. I am I have a family who is amazing. I grew up with my brother and myself and my mom, my dad, and my grandparents, and I'm going to get to why all this matters. And until literally thinking about this question about what's my background with career and college and school, and I was like, I kind of think my journey set off right when I left college, high school. My grandparents had a very successful janitorial business, and entrepreneurship has literally been in my bones since I was probably 13 years old. I remember walking down the neighborhood when I was younger with my grandmother, who would, at the time when they first started their business, they started janitorial for residential homes and knocking on doors and letting people know, the old school way of marketing for your business. And that's how she got some of her clients. And then she moved into corporate, doing cleaning for corporate buildings and things like that. And so when I graduated high school and went to college, both of my grandparents, and specifically my grandfather, was diagnosed with cancer. And we all lived together. So I'm sure that a lot of your audience knows, our families, usually we all live together. This is a thing.
Yeah.
And I am so thankful for that experience. And so when I had decided to go to college at the time, my mom was working a full-time job. My dad was working a full-time job. I was working. I was also a full-time volunteer at that time, as well as going to college. And then my grandparents got sick, and it was the question of who's going to take care of the family, who's going to take care of this business, who's going to support. And I'm the youngest, and I'm the oldest, but I'm also the go-getter. I can do it all, right? And so I was like, I'm going to try everything. I'm going to do it all. I went to college. I had my own job, my volunteer work, and then I started running their business, doing a lot of their actual running of their business and cleaning and all that kind of stuff.
Oh,
I
wow.
got burnt out really quickly and I had to make a choice. And for me at the time, it was like take a pause on school at the time and then find where I was going to go with that. But unbeknownst to me, that was really the trajectory into how I even ended up here today, which is so fascinating because at the time I didn't have a chronic illness. And so over the years of just really supporting them and being there for my family, I ended up getting married and then literally 3 weeks after getting married, having these really freaky, weird symptoms in my life. And I didn't know what it was. And so I had worked in corporate, in the pharmaceutical companies. I had worked in community events and building for our little county that we were in. So I had a lot of experience working with people and connecting with people, but all that kind of went quiet when I started being really sick. I used to go to the hospital multiple times a month, multiple times a week sometimes. And it was just to a point that I couldn't work and I couldn't really function living at that time. And that's kind of where it led to where I am today. We started getting some answers. It took some time to find some answers. My first diagnosis was with endometriosis, which at the time, nobody even knew what that was. Nobody even talked about it. I know now we hear so much about it. You know, if you're on social media in any shape or form, women talk about this often, hear about this in topics. There's hashtags for it. There wasn't an Instagram when when I was diagnosed with this. And it was kind of lonely having those experiences and not really knowing what's going on. And my family definitely didn't know. And so it kind of led to this trying to discover, how do I support my family, create a livable income while dealing with pain, chronic pain and things like that. And a good friend of mine just reached out to me and she was supporting me through my health journey. And she was like, you could do something like health coaching, but for business. And I was like, what's that? Never heard of this. And she's like, you've always had a successful track record in all of the things that you had done. So it might be a good place to start looking into. And sure enough, did some classes online, learned about it, got certified, and I was like, this is the best thing since sliced bread. And I've been doing it ever since. That's a little bit of the story, but it's a completely different angle than I've ever talked about it because of that question.
Wow. So many things stood out to me. First off, I am so glad that you mentioned that you are coming from a multi-generational household, having to make very, very difficult decisions to support your family, not just yourself. And all of that came before you even got a diagnosis. And then I'm familiar with endometriosis. I don't have a diagnosis, but I have had a long history of issues with uterus pain, pelvic pain, menstrual pain. I was that kid who was out sick a couple times a month, every month, every time being sent home as a child. And I know that I'm familiar with it, but can you very briefly define or just tell us what endometriosis is for the folks who just have no idea what it is?
Yeah, sure. I will say what it's not first, because you will hear a lot about what it mistakenly and misconceptions have been said about it. It is not a bad period. It is not a reproductive only immune chronic condition. It is literally the whole body experience of how the reproductive things all work together, right? And so when those things aren't working well together, they can float and be in different parts of your body. So with endometriosis, there are certain lining, they call them, the lining can be float. And I like to say float because there's not really a best way, and adhere to different parts of your body. But ultimately, it's a whole body experience that your body's experiencing. They have found endometriosis in people's brains, lungs, liver, gallbladder, appendix. It is not just located in your reproductive area.
Yeah.
But for the majority of the women that I know, it usually presents as an experience where you have, quote unquote, really bad periods, but it's to a different level. So I'm like you, Yvette, when I was in high school, nobody knew this, like, especially as a Black woman, like, oh, you're supposed to be in pain in your period. And I really do believe I probably had it since I started my cycle.
Same.
But yeah, right. Yeah. And it caused so much pain where you were out of school, like you couldn't go to school or you couldn't go to work, or you had extremely heavy and huge, like long periods, very heavy periods, even clots even, and things like that. And they have been told, and most women have been told, like, that's just the woman's plight. That's just what you have to deal with. And it can affect your bowel. It can affect your bladder. It can affect pretty much every part of your body. And it is a really intensive pain, a chronic pain condition for me. And for some women, they could have endometriosis and have literally no pain. They only know that they have it once they're trying to have children. And because of where it is in their body, it can create some trouble with that. So, and infertility. So it's really not a one and done statement of saying that it's just, a reproductive issue. It's really a whole body autoimmune disease. It has not been classified as that as of yet. But it's interesting if you follow, Endo Coalition. If you check that out, it's called endo.co. They are an organization that talks about endometriosis and talks about how if you ever were to try to apply for, what am I looking for? What's the word?
Disability, SSI.
If you were ever, exactly. If you were ever to apply for disability, all of the symptoms that you experience with endometriosis is covered, but endometriosis is not, which is ridiculous. So it is a very, it's a very painful experience. And for me, it definitely was. I mean, I was in the hospital multiple times. And it's not something as of now that people can, like, the doctors can find on like an x-ray. Like, you have to have surgery, exploratory surgery for it to be seen. There are some other ways that I have found just in my own journey of living with endometriosis, of learning that there are actually other signs that give you more kind of ideas that it could be endo. But if you have any of the symptoms I just said, you should say this to your doctor and say, I'm experiencing these things and I've heard of endometriosis. What can we do to consider this as an option?
It's so tricky. I'm glad so thank you for demystifying and debunking that myth that, oh, you just have painful periods and that's it. Thank you for also calling attention to the fact that it's like a whole body multi-system disease that can affect all of your body depending on where the lining of the uterus kind of goes outside of your uterus. It just like can spread everywhere. And thank you just for telling us also that it can be tricky to get a diagnosis. Like you said, right now, the dominant way to get a diagnosis, which is why I don't have a diagnosis, even though I have a lot of overlaps with what you've shared about endometriosis, a lot of overlapping symptoms, is that you need that exploratory surgery. You need to get laparoscopic surgery. Not everyone can just have a random surgery, just schedule it in, no big deal. If we had accessible healthcare,
right,
and understanding accommodating workplaces, maybe, but that's a whole other conversation for another day.
Yes.
But thank you. I just want to say thank you for talking about that, because this episode is about chronic illness, and that is a big part. That is, not the only thing. I know you mentioned the fibromyalgia piece. That's a whole other condition.
Yes.
I know a lot about chronic illnesses because there's a lot of them have they're like co-occurring conditions.
Yes.
So if you have one, you have a bunch.
You have more than
this
one
is like my
usually.
side.
Yes.
My side passion is like doing research on chronic illnesses and watching all these documentaries and, staying on top of the research too, which
Yes.
you're right on point. I think I found that there was a recent article that proved that endometriosis is a multi-system disease, which like anybody who has had those symptoms knows, duh.
Okay, like if you can have pain that reaches to your pinky toe on your foot, it's got to be more than just in the girly parts. Like we got some more stuff going on.
So I want to kind of go back to, because you told us a little bit about your personal background, also your educational career trajectory. And you mentioned that there was someone who told you might want to consider doing the health stuff, but from a business perspective. So can you tell us a little bit more about that journey of becoming a business coach, and also maybe some challenges? Like how have you navigated these challenges? I know from my lived experience, being an entrepreneur is tricky in and of itself. It's just like all learning curves upon learning curves. But then on top of that, with the challenge of navigating chronic health issues, like tell us a little bit about how you navigate that.
It is not easy. You're so right. It's interesting. I just did an episode on the fact that entrepreneurship alone with an able-bodied normal life is hard with a capital H. It is hard. Okay. Like it's so hard. And then you add living with maybe one, but most of us do. We have at least 2 to 3, sometimes 6 other chronic illnesses. And then that's just our bodies. It's not mentioning like partners, spouses, children, life. We're not even talking about those aspects of things. And so you're right. When my friend told me about this, the reason why it was so interesting, she shared this with me because I asked her a question. I'm like, how are you one? At the time she was volunteering in her ministry full time. She was running this really successful health coaching business, also living with endometriosis and adenomyosis, which that's a whole nother condition connected usually to endometriosis and fibroids. And she was just happy-go-lucky. And I was like, girl, what are you doing in your life? And how are you like contributing to your household? That was always my thing. I'm a very go-getter. I'm half Jamaican. I love work. I love to work. I love to be around people. And I was like, this is a really hard challenge of trying to figure out how to grow a business. At the time, I was doing digital marketing services online for clients. I was figuring out a way to do stuff. But what was the challenge was doing it where I wasn't always reliant on other people's time frame, right? So if you're starting a business as a provider, oftentimes you're putting a part of your time into the hands of someone else. And I found that to be extremely challenging for the uncertainty of what my life was at the time. And so she mentioned to me, she's like, well, just like you've been kind of going into my portal and creating a call at a time that works for me and how I do my business, it's very based on like what I put out there and my clients work with it. I was like, I love that. Like, let's do something like that. And I took some courses. Like I said, I took some courses online on like business coaching specifically. Like, what are the things that my clients would need to know? All of that logistics. Great. Wonderful stuff. Needed it. Absolutely. But what I didn't find was how to do this with chronic illness. I didn't find that. And so I would say for about 5 years, I fumbled on figuring out how to figure this out, right? So I tried different models, different systems, different processes until I realized that I was getting information and advice from people who were not forthcoming on how were they doing this thing in their business during a flare-up, during multiple medical protocols, during multiple visits to doctor's appointments, physical therapy, changing medications that make your hormones and your emotions go all crazy, all of those different things. And nobody was offering that advice. So I really took some time to like sit with, it can work. Obviously, people are doing this. Like it can work, but how does it need to work? And that's where I came back to that whole, and it sounds like so fluffy when I say it, but it's real. The whole mind-body alignment thing. And I was like, what? I need to figure out, there has to be an alignment within what I'm doing. And the alignment at the time was I was just helping anybody and everybody as women in their businesses, mostly creatives, because I love a creative person. But what I found was they didn't understand it either. They didn't understand growing a business, living with chronic illness. And when I needed to reschedule, or when they appreciated having the space of being, if they needed to reschedule or if their life happened. But I was like, this is probably a niche that I hadn't discovered. I hadn't really tapped into. And I was like, if there was someone like me who could give me the permission, and also like, here's how you can still show up in your business, even when you're sick, even when you're in a flare up. Wouldn't that be golden? Like, wouldn't that be golden? Wouldn't that be sweet? And so I really worked with my clients to create some frameworks around how to do that. And so a lot of the work, though, was transforming the way I viewed myself with chronic illness, instead of viewing it as this limitation, as this thing that held me back. I had to see, where were the strengths that I've learned because of living with chronic illness. I had to think about, where were the strengths outside of just my chronic illness that I was not tapping into, which was my resourcefulness, which was my determination, also my experience in other areas. Something that's really interesting when you live with chronic illness, you tend to doubt yourself more than the average person, on top of feeling the pressure of trying to prove your worth to everyone else. And I found that that was the biggest thing I was doing, and I was trying to do. I was trying to prove that I could do this like everyone else, and I literally could not. I had to do it in a way that worked for me, and I had to do it in a way that gave me the flexibility and the capacity. And so that would be my first thing for anyone who's like, how do you do all of this? It's like, you have to do it on your terms. It cannot be on anyone else's. You have to accept, to a degree, a part of your challenges as also being a springboard for creating the life you want in those challenges. And that's what I do. That's what I do with my clients. We sit down, we look at it, we face the ugly things sometimes, and we accept, and then we find a way that works for you. And that's really how I've kind of grown this business, is just accepting. Like, I don't wait for the flare up to happen. I know it's going to happen at some point, right? So I've designed my business to support me when that flare up comes. And how does that work? A lot of times it's through systems. A lot of times it is having someone in your business to help you, and you giving yourself permission to say, it's okay to take a break.
Yeah. Wow. That was, I feel like I needed that message.
I love that.
That was really, really, yeah. I'm 100% in agreement with everything that you said. I am definitely on a similar path, myself of, you support entrepreneurs. I support students, undergraduate students, graduate students. And I think we mentioned before starting the recording that, I don't know, like, to what extent does this fit into the platform, to grad school femtoring? And I do have a lot of first-gen BIPOC undergrads and graduate students and early career professionals who are listeners. But more and more people are reaching out to me because of me speaking out more and more about my chronic illnesses.
Yeah.
And so I don't have the numbers, but just based on who's more vocal and who reaches out, I have a good amount of folks who listen, who need that kind of support, who need to have that support from someone who has lived it, who has gone through it, who has tested out what works and what doesn't work, who has struggled with that internalized ableism of like, I have to do the things the same way that everybody else does. I have to prove my worth all the time, even more than people who are able-bodied or non-disabled or not chronically ill. So yeah, I just want to kind of echo that for you, that I appreciate you and what you offer, and that there's a lot of people who are in need of this kind of support to try to figure it out for themselves.
Yeah.
Now, the next question I have, though, is about why entrepreneurship? Because there are a lot of people who are trying to find jobs and who are trying to find workplace settings that are hospitable and that are accommodating. And you're laughing. Okay, now I know where the answer is going to go. Now I know what direction it's going to go.
Okay.
And I think there are some places, although those are hard to find. But yeah, I'm curious in terms for you, like, why entrepreneurship as opposed to having a nice, steady, stable paycheck? And also, what are the pros and cons of entrepreneurship? Because we know there are pros and cons to it for anybody, but what are the pros and cons to entrepreneurship for you as someone who also navigates dealing with chronic illnesses?
Such a good question, and you're so right. You're so right. There are pros and cons to each thing. As I mentioned, I'll share from my experience, and then I'll share what I have found with some of my clients to be true for them. But I will say, in my beginning stories of like unearthing what chronic illness looked like in my life, which for anyone who lives with chronic illness, you know, there is this ebb and flow of not, sometimes you feel good, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you get a diagnosis and sometimes you're like, this can't be that diagnosis. Like there's more, right? And so it's not really necessarily a firm, I'm well, now I know, and I'm all good. That's not usually how the chronic illness warrior's journey looks like. When I first was dealing with all of this, I was working in corporate. I was working in a pharmaceutical company. I always have my side gig because, like I said, that's just me. But as accommodating as they could be for that situation, I felt as a person, I felt like it played into the mindset of being unempowered, unable to make true choices that would give me the capacity to do and live my life beyond just being sick. And so for me, that was the challenge. That was also, my husband will say, that's probably been your challenge just in general because you don't like getting told what to do. But for me, it was just, it just never felt like a really good fit where I could find the balance or the harmony between allowing someone else have more control over my time and my capacity than I had for my own. And you're 100% right. Some of us are not meant for entrepreneurship. Like we have no desire. My husband's one of them. It's like the hardest thing. I'm just like, you want to start a podcast? Let's do a podcast. And he's like, great. I don't make like, it's a hard thing. Right. But there are companies out there that I know, because I have some clients that have jobs that are so supportive and it's also so in line with their purpose as a person that it works really well. And I will say, those of you who have a chronic illness and you're like, there's no way I want to be an entrepreneur, find a job that connects more to who you are and what you want to be bringing into the world. And that, to me, is what will help you find the empowerment, find the words to say when you do need to ask for help or do FMLA and feel like you're taking away. It feels more in alignment with you. I think alignment truly is important for anyone living with chronic illness because our energy and our capacity is so contained oftentimes within the lens of what we can and what we can't do. And you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're constantly fighting with, outward conversations on what you can't do when you just want options. And so that's how I feel about corporate. There are jobs that are out there that are amazing for those that are looking for that purpose, and they like thrive off of that, right? Like they're just excited and they find the right people to support them in that journey. But in entrepreneurship, there's a different side of that journey. You do have more options. You do have more time to figure out what works for you. But But I would say the con to entrepreneurship is that it takes a bit more patience. It takes a bit more effort at times. It also takes your willingness to connect with other people. And that's one challenge I find for those of us living with chronic illness. We like to live in pain and privacy. And that one little thing, though, is why I also encourage people to do entrepreneurship, because it helps you find your community.
Yeah.
I can truly say, I don't think I would have the tools or the know-how for living with chronic illness in general, just in general, not just in business, if it weren't for the rooms that I decided to walk in because of my business. And it's given me the tools in order to manage living with chronic illness on a holistic level, more completely.
I mean, that's kind of how we even were put in touch.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, it was a friend who was part of a similar network that you were part of for podcasters who happened to tell me, hey, Nikita needs a guest who, you know, has this experience. I was like, I'm signing up.
Yes. Yes. And it's funny because and I think part of the reason why that's happened for me in this business is because my business literally is to support people like me, like who are living with chronic illness. But it's easier to talk about what you're going through when someone else is in a similar journey. And in the corporate world, we're almost afraid to speak about what's going on in our personal life because we can, and I personally experienced this, you can be sidelined, you can be shamed, you can literally lose your job because of talking about some of these things that we literally have no control over, but is our life. And so that is the other reason why I feel like entrepreneurship is such a great tool for those living with chronic illness in order to get some more agency in their life. So even if you have a 9-to-5, I still encourage, like I said, half of my clients have 9-to-5s and they're doing a business on the side because of, one, they have a greater mission. Two, they see that they have greater capacity to tap into their agency as a person living with chronic illness in their entrepreneur business, in their world, versus what they can do in a job. So that would be my kind of like picture, if you will, of corporate versus entrepreneurship.
And I'm glad that you mentioned too that if someone's like, nope, I'm never doing entrepreneurship, it's not for me. I know for a fact. I used to think that about myself. Because I grew up, it's like entrepreneurship is also in my blood. Like my mom was always, she has a botanica, so she has a store where she sells like religious and syncretic and all kinds of items. And so I grew up like in swap meets. I grew up like just being around a bunch of people selling stuff. I just grew up around entrepreneurship, and I saw how hard she worked and how much she hustled and how it provided for the family. And I thought to myself, that's a lot of hard work. I don't know if I want to do it.
It is a lot of hard work.
But now I see why she did it and all the opportunities it afforded her as a single mom of 6. So, but just saying, I want to go back to like, for the folks that are thinking that entrepreneurship is not for them, one, it might be useful to reconsider it. But two, if you know there's no way at all that you would ever pursue entrepreneurship and you're definitely going to stay in a 9-to-5, I want to go back and re-emphasize what you said about finding a place that is in alignment with you, and about how a lot of us with chronic illnesses have an energy envelope, or like a delimited amount, what some people call spoons, like a limited amount of spoons or energy every single day. And what I found in my work is that there are some parts of my work, actually a lot of them, but not all of them. There are parts of my work that feel so good that even though it's work, it energizes me. Yes. It restores me. It replenishes me. So that's why I think that alignment is super duper important. I'm glad that you mentioned it, because not all work is going to drain you or is going to exploit you or is going to deplete you. So just keep that in mind as you look. I'm telling the audience, like, as you're looking for jobs, if you know entrepreneurship is not for me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're getting close to wrapping up. I have another question though. I'm curious what advice you would give either to your younger self or to anyone who is first gen, person of color. Maybe they're in college, maybe they're taking a break from their education journey, but they're trying to figure out how to live life and navigate this world with chronic illnesses. It's tricky, y'all. So what advice would you give to your younger self? The one that was like, here it comes every month. I'm going to have these issues, and not just every month, but like, at least every month I'm going to have some major pain or some hiccups or some, some things that are going to come up and get in my way of doing things the way everybody else does. What advice would you give to yourself and to others listening right now?
We all have strengths. We all have them. I don't care if it's you have a gab ability, like you can talk to anyone at any time. You could be the most quieted, introverted person who reasons and are super like analytical in your brain. Your strengths, everyone has them, and don't discount them. I think that's the biggest thing I would tell myself as a like younger version me, being like, don't limit yourself because you don't believe in your strength. Right? It's easy. It's so easy for us to see all of the reasons why we're not enough. Period. So easy. It takes a really audacious, courageous will to see what is good in you, what is your strength, what is your, like, if you were to ask 5 of your best people around you, like, what makes you tick, and they say this thing, and you're like, oh, that's probably the thing you have discounted. And I would say, as a woman living, one, with multiple chronic illnesses, Black, and my spiritual heritage often comes into the play of this, I'm often discounted. I am often dismissed. I better not do that to myself. And neither should you. Like, I'm saying that just because you have power when you take the power you have and you wield it like it's the magic genie or something. Like, you can wield it. And my power, and I've really learned my power, is I love people. And I also have this determination in me that you can't keep me down. You just can't. You just can't do it. And I'm determined to figure it out. I'm going to figure it out no matter what. I'm going to figure out whatever the problem is. And sometimes that can get me in trouble. But it's also the reason why I'm so successful in so many different areas of my life. So whatever your strengths are, discover them, find them, work to do that. And don't ever let anyone tell you different.
Yeah. Thank you for that. For folks that want to learn a little bit more about your work, your services, I'm happy to have you share a little bit more about your services and also like how others can reach you, can find you, can connect with you.
Oh, well, thank you so much, first of all, for having me on. This has been such a fun and enlightening conversation.
Yeah. I feel like I could just keep talking to you just for on and on and on.
This is so good. Like, I'm learning, I'm learning. So I learned so much by doing these kind of interviews where I'm being interviewed, because I've got over 160 something episodes on my podcast. But often I'm like, oh man, I love that question about me. Like, I need to think about that. So thank you for having me. And yeah, my coaching business is a holistic approach to growing your business. Whether you live with chronic illness or not, some of you may have thoughts of having a business, but you don't have a chronic illness, but you got life hurdles, is what I call them. And you're like, how do I find capacity to do my life along with starting a business? My approach as a chronic illness warrior is very helpful to them. Very helpful to them. And so what I would say is, I work with my clients usually on a 6-month to a year program. And it just starts with a call. It starts with a call, and we jump on the call and we really talk about what it is that you're looking for, what you're looking to do, as well as if you want to learn more about me, you can go to Thrive with Nikita on Instagram, and you can go to Crafted to Thrive for my podcast, where I talk about all things entrepreneurship with chronic illness. And I have guests like Yvette. You can find our episode on there, and so many other women, along with just some solo episodes for me.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you once again for being here, for sharing I love that I got to hear more about your story, because I do listen to your podcast. I'm one of your listeners, and I hadn't heard that side of you. So thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing your wealth of knowledge, and just thank you for sharing space with me today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining me in the Grad School Femtoring podcast. If you like what you heard, here are 4 ways you can support the show. The first is to make sure you're subscribed and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. If you email me a screenshot, I'll send you a surprise freebie. The second way is to get your copy of my free Grad School Femtoring resource kit, which includes essential information to prepare for and navigate grad school. You can access it at the link in today's show notes. The third way to support my show is to follow me on social media. You can find me on Instagram with the handle @GradSchoolFemtoring and on LinkedIn by searching my name. The last way to show your love is to order a copy of Is Grad School for Me, my graduate school admissions book for first-gen BIPOCs. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.